As we start the journey for statistics, we want to talk about a lot of the vocabulary, but also talk about what skills are going to be necessary for doing the statistical work that we're embarking on. So we'll start first of all with essential vocabulary, and we'll end with some examples of how we can use this vocabulary. So first of all, we want to recognize what statistics is. Statistics as a mathematical study has a lot of art to it as well as process and procedure. So it is the science and art of collecting, analyzing, and drawing conclusions from data. So as we gather data, as we use data in order to make inferences, to do work, to help us with whatever we're trying to study, we want to use different techniques, and that's what the art and the science of statistics is. So really, statistics, what we're looking at is as we gather the data, it's the statistics is the language of variation. How do things vary? When we look at data, how does it change? What does that change tell us about what has happened, what is going to happen? Now, we need to talk about the actual vocabulary that we will be using. We do use the word individual, which doesn't always refer to a person. An individual will be something that we describe that will describe the set of data. It could be people, animals, or it could be just things. So an object described in a set of data. So sometimes we'll collect data and the individuals will be people. Sometimes we'll collect data and the individual might refer to a type of car or different brands of cars. Okay, so usually this would mean it's people, could be animals, or it could be just things, like cars or whatever. Now, a variable is something that we're going to actually assign the data to. It's a characteristic that can take different values. The different values for the individuals. So whatever we describe as being the individual, a person, an animal, or a thing, we gather values for that. So it might, if it's a person, it might be we might gather values like what their heights are, or we might gather, for instance, how far away they live from a certain city. Okay, now, it's important to recognize, and we'll talk about this for our AP course, these two terms are essential to understand in order to do well in the AP course. So this is a tip that for the AP course, you need to learn to distinguish between these two types of variables. It determines what type of techniques we use, what kind of data we gather, all that sort of information. This will funnel our work in a certain direction. So categorical variable is one that has values that are labels. Okay, so it might be different breeds of dogs would be the labels that we would give. Okay, also for this, it places an individual into a particular group. So as an example, if we're talking about cars, it could be we might talk about brands, we might talk about types of fuel it uses, whether it uses electric, gas, or diesel, something like that. All right, so this is important though, because oftentimes people think it can't be numbers, but it can be numbers, okay? So put a little note here, it can be a number, especially when that number is not really measuring anything. Like as an example, I'll give a specific example for this. Example would be zip code. Zip code is assigning a person to a certain region. It doesn't measure the person at all. And so zip code would be a categorical variable. All right, quantitative variable usually is the numbers we're talking about. So quantitative quantity usually refers to that. So this would be counting or measuring something. Okay, that's what we do with the quantitative variable. So when we do this, usually we're usually looking at the numbers. Usually a number that's measured something or counted something, okay? But again, sometimes you can use that as a category as well. All right, so why don't you put down here though, we've already used it in the title, it would be a number that's a quantity. Okay, so a quantity would be our quantitative variable. All right, so that gets those two defined. They're very important to have those two because it determines a lot of the other work that we're going to do. Now, the distribution of a variable tells us what values of the variable takes and how often. Okay, so values are used and how often they are used. So that would be the distribution of that variable. A frequency table now will help us to start summarizing information about it. So a frequency table is just how many of something. Shows the number of individuals having each value. Okay, so we'll look at a frequency table example in just a little bit. A relative frequency table will do a little bit of a summary of talking about what the percentage is or maybe the ratio that it is for it. So it shows the proportion or percentage of individuals. Okay, having each value. All right, so they're tied together, but this just tells us the number of them. This will say what ratio do you have, this out of how many or what percentage we have. All right, now we talk about statistical inference. We'll get to the point where we will start drawing some conclusions. So a statistical inference is drawing conclusions beyond the data. So with this one, what that means is like we'll look at the data, we'll look at the summary, the frequency or the relative frequency table. We'll start drawing conclusions about what that tells us about the data. All right, now let's actually get to the steps that we'll start using and the skills that we'll start using. So the problem-solving process, when we look at statistics and we want to solve problems with statistics, using the information to come up with conclusions, the first step is to ask questions. Questions are very important as part of the statistical process. Next, we collect data. The third step after we do that is to analyze that data. And then the last step, once we've analyzed the data, we want to interpret what the results are. So a big part of statistics is coming up with information, drawing some conclusions and interpreting it as part of making next steps, conclusions for a problem we might have, or to seek a solution to something. Right now, the skills we're going to use, statistical skills, are very similar to this. So the first skill will be, what method are we going to select? So selecting statistical methods. All right, so you select the method to work with, then you learn to analyze the data. We'll learn that skill. Okay, the third skill we're going to work on is using probability and simulation. That will come a little later. And then the fourth one that we'll use will be making statistical arguments. Okay, so that's the information that a lot of our vocabulary that we have, and then these will be the process that we use in most of our statistical steps, and these are the skills we're going to work on in that process. All right, let's look at a couple different things to use this vocabulary and use, kind of put it into some examples. So the first one is, Emily goes to every home softball game to gather data about the opposing teams. For each team, she records the color of their jersey, the number of runs they score, the number of players on their roster that get in the game, and how many pitches they throw. So now we've got several pieces of information. Let's first of all talk about who the individuals are in this. Well, the individuals are the teams that are visiting for the game. So individuals, that's who we're gathering the data on. Okay, visiting teams. So we might categorize those if we're a school, maybe the visiting school teams that we have coming. If we're a club team, visiting club teams. Okay, that's what the individuals are. The variables, on the other hand, for this one, notice that we've got a lot of things we're gathering information about. So the first variable is jersey color. Okay, Okay, the second one is the number of runs The third one is we have the number of players that get into the game. I'm going to abbreviate that as just the number of players. Okay, and the abbreviations for that get into the game, and how many pitches. That's the data we are gathering from each of the teams that are visiting, that Emily is gathering. All right, so we're going to classify each variable as categorical or quantitative. Well, looking at these, jersey color, not a number, it's a category. So I'm going to put down category, that's jersey color. Now, for the ones that are quantitative, the other ones involve gathering numbers on it, so quantities, values. So that would be number of runs, number of players, and how many pitches. Those are our quantitative variables that we use. Now, next, let's throw a little bit of a curveball, if you will, for this softball game. What kind of variable would it be if Emily were to go and write down the number of the third baseman? That's part of her data gathering. She goes to the game, finds the team, writes down the third baseman's number. That number is not really measuring anything. It's not like how many runs they've scored. It's not like how many singles they've gotten or how many RBIs in the games. It's just identifying that player on the field. They're identified by that. It's a category for her. So what kind of variable would it be? This would be a category because it actually is just giving a category of which number they have, identifying them on the field, okay? So be aware of that if it's not giving a value to it, it's not counting or measuring something, then we've got a category instead. All right, let's do another example here. Here are the data. Data is plural, so we use the word are. So here are the data for the fourth period class calculators. Write a frequency table and a relative frequency table. So if you look at this, I went around my fourth period class, counted how many calculators were black, were blue, were gold, were white, purple, etc. I came up with this table out of my 24 students. So if you look at this, let's go ahead and categorize it. So if you count the number of black ones here, let's do pink first, okay? Pink, we have only one of them. So frequency would be just a 1. Now for black, you count the number of black ones on this chart, and if you count them all up, I count 14 of them when I count them up. All right, now when I go to blue, again, looking at this list, I only see one blue calculator out of that list. Next, if we do purple, if you count the purple, like here is a purple 1, here's 2 for our list. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, and then for all those, when we look at the rest of our list here, so we've got, for our purple calculators, we've got 3 of them. When you got white, look over the list here. I look over the white, and I think I see 4 of them, okay, when I see for the white ones. So 4 white calculators on this list. Let's see, we've got listing them here. So we go with 1, we've got 2, 3, and I think I'm missing one of them here. So let's just go down here. We go 1 on this list, 2, 3, there we go. There's the other one, and 4. So we got 4 on the list. And then we count the number of gold calculators. And as I look at this, I think I only see one of them. So it's a total, if you add that up, there's 24 students, 24 calculators. So a frequency table is just listing how many, list what the individual is. The individual, this is the individual listing, the color of the calculator, okay? And so on this one, so the individual is the people, what we're doing is we're categorizing it. So we've got a category here of the color of calculator, and then we're gonna list which ones we get for those. All right, so now let's do the color of calculator and let's do relative frequency. So let's say there's 24, I would do 1 divided by 24. Now if I would put that as a decimal, now I have to round these, so it could be that it doesn't round up to 100% or to 1. I'm gonna round it to 3 decimal places, so that's what it would be. That would be 4.2% if I list it as a percentage. Black would be 14 out of the 24. As a decimal, that would be 0.8583, so 58.3% for that. For blue, it's 1 out of 24, again 0.042, we find that decimal. Purple is 3 out of 24, and that decimal is 0.125 exactly, that one we didn't have to round. Then white is 4 out of 24, which again, we'll round that to 0.167. And then lastly, gold is 1 out of 24. And so that would get 0.042. Okay, so we get a total of 24 out of 24, which if we do the total, we get 100%. Again, because of rounding, these might be just a little bit off from that. That's part of it. So we have vocabulary we have to use. The vocabulary that we really need to focus on is who the individuals are and then what variables we're studying from that. And when we talk about those variables, when we're doing statistics, we want to look at somehow representing it. So as just an elementary start to it, we're going to show it with a frequency table and a relative frequency table in order to summarize the data we have from this study.